Welcome back, everybody. We are diving deep today into the life and thought of someone you might not know as well as, say, a Socrates or a Plato. But trust me, this guy, Prodicus, he was a major player in ancient Greece.
Yeah, Prodicus is someone who really makes you rethink how we use language. And I mean, like, really basic stuff, like what even are words and how they shape how we see the world.
Definitely makes you wonder if we're all using words as effectively as we could be, right?
He was also way ahead of his time in terms of how he thought about religion.
And don't forget ethics. His most famous work is all about tough choices and how we decide what really matters in life.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The choice of Hercules, such a classic story.
Okay, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's set
Yeah.
the stage here. Prodicus was born way back in the 5th century BC on this little island called Chios.
Cios was actually a pretty happening place back then, known for its poets and thinkers.
Like Simonides, right. I remember reading that Prodicus was a huge fan of his work.
Exactly. Prodicus is even said to have kind of modeled his own writing style after Simonides.
So this was clearly a guy who was surrounded by big ideas from a young age.
And he didn't stay put on that island. He traveled all over Greece, making a name for himself as a teacher and a speaker.
He was a sophist, right? Which I guess back then didn't have quite the same negative connotation it does today.
True sophists sometimes get a bad rap, but essentially they were just professional educators who got paid to teach rhetoric, philosophy, you name it.
Kind of like freelance professors traveling from city to city offering their wisdom.
And they had to be good at attracting students competing with other sophists. It was pretty cutthroat business, actually.
I bet.
Yeah.
Especially since, from what I've read, Prodicus's voice wasn't exactly what you'd call radio ready.
Yeah, there are all these accounts about how his voice was super deep and would kind of crack or fade out at times.
You'd think that'd be a major setback for a public speaker, but somehow it didn't stop him.
Must have had some serious stage presence to make up for it, some real charisma.
Which makes sense, right? Given
Oh.
what we know about his ideas, Prodicus was all about the power of language, like seriously obsessed with it.
He was convinced that choosing the right word, making those tiny distinctions in meaning, could change your whole understanding of something.
And not just in some abstract philosophical way either, but like in a practical, how you live your life kind of way.
Absolutely. He saw language as the key to clear thinking and ultimately to living a more ethical life.
So it's not just about memorizing definitions or sounding smart, it's about using words as tools to improve ourselves.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the power of language to shape our thoughts, our emotions, even our actions.
Which brings us to that famous story of his, the choice of Hercules. Everyone knows the basic plot, right?
Mhm.
Young Hercules is just chilling when these two ladies show up, Vice and Virtue, and they basically offer him two different paths in life.
It's such a vivid scene. You can practically picture Hercules standing there trying to decide between a life of pleasure and ease or a life of challenge and ultimately real fulfillment.
It's one of those stories that just sticks with you long after you've heard it. I
Mhm.
know I've thought about it at different points in my own life when I've had a big decision to make.
It's a timeless dilemma, isn't it? Trying to figure out what truly matters and which path will lead us to the good life.
I'm seeing now how this story fits with his ideas about language.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just a random fable. It's a way of showing how the words we hear, the stories we tell ourselves, they all influence the choices we make.
Exactly. Think about how vice and virtue present their arguments. They each use language to try and persuade Hercules, painting these completely different pictures of what his life could be.
Vice is all about indulging your desires,
Yeah.
going for instant gratification,
Exactly. She probably uses all kinds of flowery language, promising him luxury and comfort.
while virtue emphasizes hard work, self-control,
Hmm.
all the things that are tough in the short term, but ultimately lead to something much more meaningful.
It's like Prodicus is giving us a masterclass in persuasive rhetoric, showing us how words can be used to either trap us or liberate us.
So fascinating. I never thought about it that way before.
And what's really cool is that Prodicus takes this idea even further than just being persuasive.
Oh, yeah. What do you mean?
He actually believed that by studying language, like really dissecting those tiny shades of meaning, we could actually train our minds to make better ethical choices.
So like language study as a form of moral self-improvement, that's pretty radical.
I know, right? But it makes sense when you think about it. If we're not even using the right words to describe something, how can we possibly understand it, let alone make good decisions about it?
I guess that explains why Socrates was such a fan of Prodicus. They both had this intense focus on language as a tool for getting to the truth.
Totally. Socrates even mentions Prodicus by name in some of Plato's dialogues. Like, he was clearly someone that Socrates respected and learned from.
I wonder what their conversations were like. Can you imagine being a fly on the wall for those discussions?
Right. Two of the greatest minds of ancient Greece debating the finer points of language and ethics. It would have been mind-blowing.
Okay, so we've talked about Prodicus's ideas on language and ethics,
Mm-hmm.
but you also mentioned earlier that he had some pretty unconventional views on religion, too.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other rabbit hole. Prodicus was basically a proto-scientist in a way.
A proto-scientist? How so?
Well, he rejected the traditional view of gods as these kind of supernatural beings who controlled everything. He thought that was just superstition.
So if he didn't believe in the gods, what did he believe in?
He believed in the power of nature. He thought that what people called gods were actually just personifications of natural forces.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Like, he saw the sun as representing light and warmth, the moon as representing cyclical change, rivers as representing life-giving water, and so on.
So instead of praying to Poseidon for a safe voyage, Prodicus might say you should respect the power of the ocean.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the forces that shape our lives and working with them rather than trying to appease some imaginary deity.
That's fascinating. I never thought about it that way before.
Mm.
It's almost like a precursor to modern-day science trying to understand the world through observation and reason.
It's definitely a more naturalistic view of the world, and it's pretty radical considering the time period he was living in.
So we've got a guy who's obsessed with language, who sees ethics as intertwined with how we use words, and who basically reimagines religion through the lens of nature. I'm starting to see why Prodicus, even though he's not as famous as some of his peers, is considered such a pivotal figure in the history of Western thought.
Yeah, he was definitely ahead of his time, and I think his ideas are still super relevant today, especially in our world of fake news and social media where language is constantly being manipulated and misused.
It's like he's giving us a warning.
Yeah.
Be careful with your words, think critically about what you're hearing, and don't take anything for granted.
Exactly. Don't be swayed by empty rhetoric or seductive language. Look deeper, question everything, and try to align yourself with what is truly valuable and enduring.
It's a pretty powerful message. I'm really starting to get a sense of why Prodicus had such a big impact on his contemporaries. Even Socrates himself seems to have been influenced by his ideas.
And speaking of impact, we haven't even touched on Prodicus's ideas about social and political systems. He had some pretty radical views on that too.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, he was a big believer in what we might call today meritocracy. The idea that positions of power and authority should be based on talent and hard work, rather than just birthright or social status.
So basically, he thought the best and brightest should be in charge, regardless of their background.
Precisely. And that was a pretty revolutionary idea back then,
It still is in a lot of ways.
especially in ancient Greece, where it was all about who your parents were or what family you came from.
Yeah, so Prodicus was basically saying, hey, forget all that. Let's give everyone a fair shot. Let's see what people can actually do.
Exactly. And that's an idea that still resonates today. I mean, we may not have achieved a perfect meritocracy, but the idea that everyone deserves a fair chance regardless of their background is a core principle of many modern societies.
Absolutely. And it's inspiring to see how these ancient thinkers were grappling with issues that are still so relevant to us today.
It really makes you wonder what Prodicus would think of our world with all its complexities and challenges.
Right, like would he be amazed by our technological advancements or horrified by how we use language to manipulate and divide each other?
Who knows, but I bet he would have a lot to say about it. And I think his insights would be just as sharp and insightful today as they were over 2,000 years ago.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Prodicus, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
You know, for me, it's that Prodicus reminds us that true knowledge and wisdom aren't just about memorizing facts or following the crowd.
It's about questioning everything, right?
Yeah.
Like really digging deep and figuring out what you believe and why.
Exactly. And not being afraid to challenge the status quo, even when it comes to things that everyone else seems to accept as truth.
And of course, it all comes back to language.
Yeah.
Prodicus was adamant that the words we use, the way we communicate, have a profound impact on our understanding of the world and ultimately on the kind of lives we live.
So choose your words wisely. Think critically about what you're hearing and never stop seeking knowledge and understanding.
Well said. Prodicus, the master of words, the champion of merit, and the philosopher who dared to challenge conventional thinking on language, ethics, and religion. What a legacy.
Indeed. And his legacy continues to live on in the way we think about the world and our place in it.
If you're as fascinated by Prodicus as we are, we encourage you to delve deeper into his work. There's so much to discover.
You might just find some ancient wisdom that speaks to the challenges of our modern world.
Until next time, keep those minds engaged.